She just wanted to avoid her ex at her sister's wedding, but the person who went with her changed everything. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Madeline Cross wasn't in the mood for family gatherings, let alone an entire weekend sharing the same house as Brandon Ellis, her ex-boyfriend. Her sister Hannah's wedding was approaching, and with it came all the social obligations she usually did her best to avoid. She tried to politely decline, claiming tight deadlines at work, unavoidable commitments, anything that sounded convincing. But her mother insisted, and Hannah made it clear she wouldn't take no for an answer. Brandon had been invited as a friend of the groom, and even if Madeline told herself his presence no longer affected her, the discomfort was there. She didn't want to see the man who once represented everything she had to unlearn in a relationship. What hurt most was knowing the family would expect an explanation, still picturing him as the ideal guy, charming, polite, and dependable. Madeline wasn't ready to explain that some disappointments don't come with scenes or noise. They quietly reshape the way someone learns to trust again. She was venting all this from Ruby Whittaker's couch, her best friend since college. The two of them wore thick socks, held mugs of hot tea, and half-watched a cooking show playing on low volume. Ruby listened patiently, following each word with that calm look she always had. When Madeline finished, Ruby suggested something that, at first, sounded absurd. Why don't you bring someone with you, not pretending it's a boyfriend or anything like that? Just someone to make the weekend a little easier. Madeline raised an eyebrow, surprised. She wasn't the type to invent relationships. Ruby laughed and clarified. It wasn't about faking romance, just about having company. Someone who's already part of your life, who you trust. Someone to run interference when the questions start. The idea lingered, odd, but not entirely out of the question. What neither of them realized was that Caleb Whittaker, Ruby's older brother, had just come down the stairs and caught the end of the conversation. He stopped quietly in the hallway and waited a few seconds before stepping in. Caleb was the reserved type, 2 years older, observant, never one to cross a line. Madeline knew that about him and respected it. Over the years, he'd been around for birthdays, holidays, family dinners, always polite, always steady, always understated. Caleb had known for a while that he liked her, but never felt there was an opening. Until now. He walked into the room casually, hands in his pockets, and said without hesitation, "If you want, I can go with you." Madeline turned her head immediately, visibly caught off guard. Caleb rarely put himself out there like that. But his tone was calm, and he didn't seem to expect anything beyond a simple yes or no. Ruby smiled and leaned back on the couch without saying a word. Madeline took a few seconds to process the offer. Caleb wasn't a stranger. She knew who he was. She knew he was kind, observant, funny, and above all, she trusted him. There'd be no pretending. They'd just go together, and for that weekend, that was more than enough. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked. He shrugged with a calm smile. "Sure, it'll be good to spend time with you, and to be honest, I don't have anything better going on." She nodded slowly. That kind of steadiness was exactly what she needed. No games, no expectations, just someone reliable by her side. 2 days later, they were on the road, heading toward the beach house where the wedding would take place. Madeline hadn't realized how tense she'd been until she felt her shoulders start to relax as the open highway stretched ahead of them. They shared playlists, funny stories, and personal tidbits. She learned Caleb liked to cook, was a fan of 80s movies, and had quietly read 3 of the novels she'd edited, without ever bringing it up. He spoke lightly, made jokes at the right moments, and paid attention without overstepping. Madeline felt her whole body easing, like something heavy she'd been carrying was starting to lift. When they arrived at the family's rental house, the salty breeze, the floral arrangements, the wedding decor, and all the chatter didn't bother her. For the first time in weeks, Brandon wasn't on her mind. She was curious, but not about the past, about Caleb. As soon as they arrived, Caleb grabbed their bags without hesitation and greeted her parents naturally, like someone who had always belonged. Hannah, busy with flowers, checklists, and constant phone calls, thanked him quickly and kept moving. The welcome dinner brought everyone together on the veranda, strung with lights. Caleb stayed by Madeline's side, listening to her uncle's fishing stories and laughing at her grandfather's jokes about local politics. He didn't try to show off, he just belonged. Madeline watched it all, a little puzzled, not because he was pretending, but because it felt like he'd always been there. Later, they walked together on the beach. He offered his jacket, and she took it without hesitation. That night, for the first time in a long time, Madeline fell asleep without mentally replaying everything she wished she could forget. And that alone made the trip worth it. Saturday began with the usual rush of a wedding's eve. Upstairs was already buzzing with voices, doors opening and closing, footsteps moving fast from one room to another. Madeline came down slowly, her hair still loose, wearing an oversized t-shirt and the dazed look of someone caught between sleep and obligation. She found Caleb out on the porch, talking with her father about types of wood used in coastal construction, a topic she never knew the two of them had in common. The scene was unexpectedly comforting. Caleb looked completely at ease, like he'd always belonged there, genuinely engaged without trying to impress anyone or fit in. Madeline sat at the breakfast table, surrounded by uncles, cousins, and a stack of freshly baked rolls. The usual questions came, and she answered without hesitation, talked about a new author, mentioned chapters she had to edit by next week, and laughed at an old story one of her aunts brought up. For the first time in a while, she felt like she could just be there, without discomfort, without that familiar tightness in her chest. Late in the morning, Brandon arrived. There was no grand entrance, but people noticed. He greeted the family with that same polished charm, carefully timed hugs, well-placed jokes, and quickly found himself at the center of a group conversation. When he saw Madeline, he paused for just a second, then walked over with a polite smile. He commented on the weather, said the beach looked the same as always, as if that were a perfectly natural thing to say between two people with a past. Madeline responded with courtesy. She didn't stretch the conversation, didn't invite more. And what surprised her most was what she didn't feel, not anger, not nervousness, not that dull ache of something unresolved. Brandon felt like a chapter she'd closed. The memories were there, but the weight of them was gone. Quiet. And somewhere in that moment, she realized she'd already made it through the hardest part. After Brandon drifted away, Caleb came over. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside her on the deck and looked out at the sea. After a few seconds, he asked how she was. Madeline answered honestly, without dressing it up. She told him she was surprised not to feel anything at all, that maybe it was proof she'd really moved on. He nodded slightly, saying nothing more, just listening. No judgment, no pity. And it was in that shared quiet that something shifted. Caleb hadn't changed, still the same calm, thoughtful, steady man. But she was seeing him differently now, like something in her had finally aligned, allowing her to really see him for who he was. Lunch was served outdoors, with long tables set under white canopies. Guests sat in small groups while waiters brought out grilled shrimp, herbed rice, and chilled white wine. Madeline found herself between two cousins talking about light topics. Caleb slid into the seat beside her naturally. He talked about architecture, sustainable renovations, small-town building projects. When she spoke, he listened, and when he spoke, she found herself leaning in. There were moments she forgot he was technically there as her +1. It just felt right, like that seat next to her had always belonged to him. When the sun began to dip lower in the sky, the wedding team called everyone over for the rehearsal. Madeline followed Hannah, helping with last-minute adjustments, chair placements, the dress, the lineup of the wedding party. In the late afternoon, before they returned to their rooms, Madeline and Caleb walked around the property, passing through small gardens, sandy paths, and low fences covered in wildflowers. The breeze had cooled, and the golden hour light stretched shadows softly over the ground. They talked about everything and nothing. Caleb told a story about a trip to Savannah. Madeline answered with a memory from a book fair in New Orleans. The conversation was effortless. And that's what stood out most: the ease, the rhythm, the comfort. Back at the house, she realized she hadn't checked her phone all day. That made her smile. Caleb noticed, but didn't ask. He just held the door open and said quietly, "See you at dinner." That night, the family gathered again on the porch, now glowing with paper lanterns and small candles on every table. Soft music played, children ran between the adults, and trays of desserts made their way from hand to hand. Brandon moved through the crowd with his usual confidence, trying to strike up conversations with some of Madeline's closest relatives. But she didn't mind. She stayed where she was, listening to Caleb tell the story of how he once completely ruined a room's color scheme by trusting a digital palette too much. She laughed hard as he described the disaster. Everything around her, what used to feel overwhelming, suddenly felt lighter, easier. And though she couldn't quite define what she was feeling for Caleb just yet, she knew one thing for sure. She was looking at him with new eyes. Sunday began with a quieter kind of movement. The sound of the waves outside was steady, but inside the house, everything felt softer. Voices came low, footsteps slower, as if everyone instinctively knew that today was the wedding day. Madeline woke to the gentle light seeping through the slats of the blinds. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she looked around and smiled faintly. The house, the smell of the sea, the breeze drifting in from the balcony. She got up slowly, tied her hair with a fabric band, and slipped on her sandals. Out on the veranda, she saw the staff setting up chairs on the deck facing the ocean. Everything was falling into place. It was Hannah's big day. Madeline stayed there out of instinct, not in a rush, without the usual restlessness that had followed her since receiving the invitation. Her body finally seemed to relax, as if something inside her had found room to settle. Caleb showed up in the doorway holding a glass of juice. He said, "Good morning," with a quiet smile, matching the calm of that early hour. She invited him in, still leaning against the doorframe. They sat together for a few minutes, talking about the ceremony schedule, the altar setup, the final timeline. He was calm, grounded, just like always. Madeline mentioned the clear sky, how it felt like the sun had picked the perfect time to shine. He said it was probably Hannah's doing. She thought of everything. They laughed together, no tension between them, just two people sharing the morning. When he stood to leave, she stayed for a while, watching the sunlight stretch across the porch, feeling that this Sunday was unlike any other family gathering she'd ever experienced. Later, she started getting ready, took a long shower, paying closer attention to her skin than usual. She moved slowly, without pressure. Picked the dress she liked most from the ones she'd brought, light, well-fitted, flattering without trying. She pinned her hair up loosely, letting a few strands fall around her face. A soft lipstick to bring out her lips, her favorite sandals. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see someone hiding. She saw a version of herself that felt whole. No discomfort, no shield. Just her, ready to live the day as it unfolded. The woman in the reflection wasn't masking emotions, and she didn't feel like she had to justify being there. She simply belonged. The ceremony started late in the afternoon. Hannah looked stunning in her flowing gown, her face glowing with emotion. Everyone turned to her with admiration. Madeline sat in the second row beside her parents, with Caleb just behind her. The music filled the air softly, The groom waited with a calm gaze, and when they met at the altar, there was a moment of connection that made even the less sentimental ones hold their breath. The sunlight painted everything gold, and the scene looked like something from a film. But it was real, and that's what made it unforgettable. During the vows, Madeline scanned the crowd, focused faces, hands clasped together, restrained smiles. Brandon stood on the other side of the deck, among the groom's friends. He didn't look at her, and strangely, she didn't expect him to. He no longer occupied space in her mind. There were no more loose ends. The ceremony didn't stir anything in her, didn't pressure her to feel something new. She wasn't looking to begin anything, just to acknowledge what she had closed inside. And that acknowledgement came gently, with no resistance, no longing. The wedding was simple, beautiful, and filled with small, moving gestures. And in the middle of it all, Madeline realized that the suffocating feeling she used to have at these events had quietly disappeared. After the ceremony, guests moved toward the reception nearby. The space was strung with lights among the trees, wooden tables adorned with delicate arrangements, soft music playing in the background. Madeline mingled with relatives, sharing hugs, laughing at old stories, when Caleb came up beside her. He didn't say anything, just offered his arm. She took it, and they walked together toward the dinner tables. During the meal, they made quiet remarks about the food, chuckled at one of her cousin's awkward toast, and shared stretches of silence, not from lack of conversation, but from comfort. Brandon passed nearby once or twice, trying to strike up conversation with her parents. Madeline watched from afar, but with no resentment. She had already crossed that bridge, and that was enough. After dessert, couples started drifting toward the dance floor under the lanterns. Caleb turned to her and held out his hand. She looked at him for a second and accepted. They danced slowly, their feet moving in time with the soft music. They didn't talk. They didn't try to define anything. It was just a gesture that made sense. Madeline rested her head on his shoulder without overthinking it. And when she realized what she'd done, she didn't pull away. Caleb didn't move. He just stayed there, holding her in step with the rhythm until the song ended and another began. They left the dance floor and returned to their table, their faces relaxed, breathing a little deeper. One of her cousins made a playful comment that drew laughs from others nearby. Madeline just smiled, not needing to say anything. Caleb's presence beside her no longer felt out of place or required explanation. It simply was. Quiet, steady, natural. Later that evening, as the music dimmed and guests began to drift away, Madeline stepped out onto the deck, facing the ocean. She sat at the edge, feet near the sand, watching the darkness speckled with light from the house behind her. Caleb joined her minutes later and sat beside her. Neither of them spoke. The waves filled the space between words, and their silence felt whole. Madeline took a deep breath, not trying to label the moment. The house didn't feel heavy anymore. The weekend, once a source of anxiety, had become a stretch of time she had crossed with peace. When she stood to leave, Caleb walked her to her room. He wished her good night with a soft smile. She nodded, opened the door slowly, and once inside, leaned against it for a moment. She didn't need to think. She already understood enough. The morning began with quiet goodbyes and suitcase conversations. One by one, the guests left the house. Madeline hugged her parents with lingering arms and a warm smile before placing her bag in the back seat. Caleb was already in the driver's seat, sunglasses resting on the dash, one hand lightly on the wheel. She got in without saying much, and he greeted her with a subtle smile, like this moment had become familiar. The engine started, and the coastal road opened up in front of them, the ocean slowly vanishing in the rearview mirror. The silence in the car wasn't heavy. If anything, it felt like an extension of the past few days. The breeze swept in through the cracked window, messing up Madeline's hair, and she didn't care. She watched the scenery pass by, occasionally glancing at him, and not by accident. She watched the shape of his mouth when he said something simple like, "Roads quiet today," or "This curve's tighter than it looks." She watched the way his jaw flexed when he clenched it in concentration behind the wheel, and the soft smile that played at his lips when he glanced at her quickly, as if to confirm that they were exactly where they should be. Caleb wore a light shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, his watch ticking away, with a precision he didn't seem to notice. Madeline found herself watching him slowly. It wasn't the scenery that drew her in, it was him, and the way he made everything feel easier, the way he didn't force anything, the way he simply existed beside her, present in a way she hadn't experienced before. When he adjusted the rear-view mirror, his fingers passed near hers, close enough to register, even without touching. More than an hour passed before Caleb broke the silence with something personal. They were on the straightest part of the road, far from any twists, and he didn't look at her when he spoke. "I offered to come with you because I wanted to be with you." It came out plainly, without build-up, without drama. Madeline didn't respond right away. She just looked at him. He went on, "I've been thinking about you differently for a while now, but it never felt like the right moment. When I heard about the wedding, I thought maybe this would give us a chance. No pressure, no expectation." Her eyes stayed on him now, more focused than before, because that kind of truth, said so calmly, needed space to settle. Caleb wasn't rushing anything. He was just being honest. "I didn't want to push, just be near you and see if maybe you'd feel something too." His tone was steady, clear. He just wanted her to understand. Madeline took a deep breath and rested her arm against the door. She wasn't used to that kind of openness, and maybe that's why his words landed the way they did, because they made sense, because they matched what they had lived. No missteps, no labels. Just time, gestures, and now, the words that quietly tied everything together. She didn't say much in return, just said softly that she'd enjoyed their time together, that she felt calm, that she liked who she was when he was around. Caleb gave her a small smile, one of understanding, not needing any long explanation. The rest of the drive passed with light conversation. Comments about traffic, about the wildflowers along the roadside, a song on the radio they both liked. But under it all, there was something new, something settled, something neither of them had said out loud, but both had already accepted. They arrived back in the city late in the morning. Caleb parked in front of her building, got out to open the trunk, and helped with her bag. Their eyes met for a little longer than usual. Madeline thanked him for the ride. He answered, "Call me if you need anything," and it meant more than it sounded. She went upstairs slowly, unpacked without rush, took the dress from the trip and hung it carefully, like it still held something sacred. The apartment was quiet, and because of that, she could sense exactly what had changed. It wasn't the space itself, it was how she moved through it now. That evening, in pajamas with her hair tied up, she picked up her phone to text him and found a message already waiting. "I really liked being with you." She smiled without thinking and typed back simply, "Me too." Then set the phone down. Nothing else needed to be said. Between messages and moments, the days that followed passed quietly, but with a new kind of presence in the smallest gestures. Madeline returned to work grounded, with her head clear and her energy aligned, as if the weekend had brought back pieces of her that had been scattered. Her packed schedule, the pending edits, the looming deadlines, they all felt easier to manage. There was something lighter about the way she walked into the office, greeted her colleagues, answered emails without letting the hours slip away. She never mentioned his name during the day. She didn't have to. All it took was the ping of a notification on her phone, or the moment she sat down for lunch alone and picked up the device, already hoping. He didn't text her constantly, but when he did, he got it right. A question about her day, a comment that reminded her of them, an emoji used simply, nothing for show, just presence. On Wednesday, Caleb texted her mid-afternoon, asking if she had time for a coffee. "I've got about 15 minutes if you're up for it." Madeline read it, thought for a few seconds, and replied that it worked, as long as he didn't mind the rush. They met at a small cafe, tucked away from the busier streets, easy for both of them to reach in the middle of the day. Caleb was already seated when she arrived, his fingers interlaced on the table, a half-empty glass in front of him. He looked up and gave her the same calm smile she'd come to recognize. Madeline sat across from him, slipped off her blazer, and ordered a short coffee. They started with small talk. The weather, traffic, some construction near her building that started far too early each morning. Then, without transition, they returned to that conversation that had begun on the road. Caleb didn't push for definitions. He simply asked how she was feeling. Madeline answered honestly. She felt good. She liked that he showed up. She liked how naturally he reached out, and she liked that she didn't have to pretend when she was with him. Caleb listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he just said that for now, that was enough. In the days that followed, they didn't go out again, but the communication didn't stop. They exchanged spaced-out messages, some good mornings, others about random things, a funny video, a childhood memory, a song she heard on the radio that reminded her of him. Caleb replied on his own rhythm, sometimes with a quick answer, sometimes with a comment that made her laugh out loud. What they were building didn't follow a script. Their connection wasn't growing through big promises, but through consistency. And Madeline allowed herself to reply however she wanted, without the fear of seeming too eager. The truth was, she was interested, and she knew it. But she'd learned not to chase what was still taking shape. She watched her own desire grow naturally, just like she started noticing the way she smiled when she remembered something he said, or how she found herself wondering what he was wearing when he texted her. The connection was there, and it didn't need to be rushed. It just couldn't be ignored. Late Saturday morning, Caleb called. Madeline was in the kitchen, rinsing coffee mugs, and answered with damp hands. He asked if she wanted to grab lunch. Nothing fancy, just go out, walk around, eat something. She said yes with a kind of ease she didn't usually have when someone invited her out. She didn't ask for an exact time or specifics, just said, "Let me know when you're close." And he answered, "Half an hour." In that time, she did a quick tidy-up around the apartment, picked out a simple outfit, tied her hair up. When the intercom rang, she was ready. Caleb was leaning against the car, his expression relaxed, like he wasn't expecting anything more than an ordinary afternoon, and that's exactly what it was. They walked through a park, window shopped, had lunch at a little corner spot, and shared dessert like it was something they always did. There was no sense of performance, just intimacy. And for Madeline, that was rarer than any carefully planned romance. On the drive back, Caleb parked in front of her building and went quiet for a few seconds. Madeline had already unbuckled her seatbelt, her hand on the door handle, when he turned to her and said, "It was a good Saturday." She nodded but didn't move. She looked at him longer than usual, as if something unsaid still hung between them. Caleb leaned in slightly. No big move, no hesitation, just a gentle shift forward. Madeline didn't pull away. Their faces were close enough that she could feel his breath, and then it happened. The kiss came naturally, without delay. A full, intentional kiss that didn't ask permission but respected every second. Their mouths met with precision. Madeline responded with certainty, with desire, with a kind of readiness she hadn't expected. His hand moved gently to the side of her face, and for a moment, time inside the car just stopped. When they pulled back, neither of them grinned widely, but their eyes said everything. Caleb ran a hand along his jaw, like he needed a second to find steady breath again. Madeline just whispered, "Good night." He answered in a low voice, eyes still locked on hers. She stepped out of the car, feeling something different in her body. His touch still lingered. So did the taste. She climbed the stairs with steady steps and entered her apartment like someone carrying a beautiful secret in her pocket. There was no uncertainty. There was desire and a clear urge to experience that again. She took a shower, but it wasn't fatigue that drove her. It was memory. She sat on the couch, hair still damp, bathrobe tied loosely around her waist, her phone nearby. A few minutes later, it buzzed. Caleb had texted, "I want to see you again." She didn't overthink it. She typed back, "I want that too," and sat there, heart racing, ready for whatever came next. On Sunday, Madeline woke earlier than usual. Her body still carried the memory of the night before, as if every movement held the warm, grounded sensation of being wanted. There was no confusion, just memory, and a desire that didn't come with fear. She showered slowly, tied her hair up high, and opened all the windows to let the morning air drift through the apartment. There were no new messages from Caleb on her phone, but she wasn't surprised. Between them, nothing needed to be pushed. Still, when Ruby texted, "You free later? I need coffee and gossip," Madeline replied almost instantly, "Come over, bring croissants." Then she started tidying up the apartment like someone preparing for a conversation too honest to pretend to be casual. Ruby arrived early in the afternoon, hair pulled into a high bun and carrying a tote bag way too big for the length of her visit. She kicked off her shoes at the door, tossed her coat on the chair, and collapsed onto the couch with the ease of someone who had long since claimed the place as her second home. "You look different," she said, even before accepting the coffee Madeline offered. "I don't know if it's your hair, your eyes, or the way you're walking, but something's up." Madeline laughed. There was no point trying to hide anything from Ruby. Their friendship had been built without filters since college, and even with different routines, they'd never drifted apart. "He kissed me last night," Madeline said, placing the croissants on a plate. Ruby raised her eyebrows, satisfied. "Finally. I thought he was going to do it at your sister's wedding." Madeline sat at the table holding her mug. "I thought so too, but honestly, I think this timing was better. And it was good." Ruby crossed her arms and leaned in, intrigued. "Good like polite good? Or good like lying in bed at night thinking about it good?" Madeline answered, with a look that needed no elaboration. Then, with more composure, she admitted she hadn't expected it. "I always thought Caleb was fun, kind, but it was over the weekend that things started shifting. The way he looked at me, I felt at ease and at the same time stirred up. It was light, but it made me alert." Ruby listened closely, though she didn't seem surprised. "He's always liked you, I noticed. I just didn't think he'd ever act on it." Madeline widened her eyes, unsure whether to take that as a confession or a tease. Ruby laughed. "Relax. When he offered to go with you to the wedding, I knew. He's not one for subtle hints." Madeline took a deep breath, her head still spinning from the night before. "And now, I can't stop thinking about that kiss, because it wasn't just the kiss itself. It's what it left behind. You know that urge to do it again, but without any tension. That." Ruby rested her chin on her hand and went quiet for a few seconds. "If he kissed you, it's because he's sure of what he feels. Caleb doesn't play around. He doesn't get close on impulse. When he chooses to be with someone, it's because he means it. And you don't look like the version of you I usually see." Madeline looked at her friend with a half smile. "It is different. I'm not putting up walls. I'm not analyzing every step. I'm just living it, and I want to keep going." Ruby didn't ask anything else. She knew enough, and she knew her brother well enough to understand that he didn't start something unless he intended to see it through. That night, with the bedroom lights off and the distant hum of the city filtering in, Madeline found herself thinking about him again. She replayed the kiss like watching a private film. The way he leaned in, the way he touched her, the certainty in his mouth, the shift in his breath after they pulled back. She wanted to feel it again, to go deeper, to not stop halfway. She touched her lips with her fingertips, reliving the warmth her body already knew. The desire didn't scare her. It wasn't needy or impulsive. It was clear, steady, grown, just like Caleb himself. And in thinking about it, she realized that neither of them needed to rush, but they also didn't need to hold back. She wanted it. So did he. And her body already knew. The week began with the usual routine, but none of it felt the same. Caleb texted early that morning. "Are you free Friday?" Madeline replied, "Yes. Why?" And he followed with a direct invitation. "I want to cook for you, at my place." She stared at the screen, reread it, then answered, "Only if there's dessert." He sent back a laughing emoji and replied, "Deal." That night she went to bed with her mind full. She already knew which dress she would wear. She was already picturing the moment he'd open the door. And more than that, she had already accepted what she hoped would happen after. On Thursday, just before the end of the workday, Ruby sent a simple message. "Good luck tomorrow. He's excited." Madeline smiled to herself as she read it. She answered with a soft "thank you" and a small heart. A few minutes later, another notification popped up. "And just so you know, I won't be sleeping at home. Figured I'd give you guys space. No awkward interruptions." Madeline replied, "You're the best," and slipped her phone into her pocket, already thinking ahead to the next night. Friday passed in a blur of tasks and buzzing notifications, but Madeline stayed focused until the end of the day. When she got home, she dropped her bag on the table, kicked off her shoes in the hallway, and headed straight to the shower. Hot water rolled down her shoulders as she let the week melt away. She dried off with care, pulled her hair up into a loose bun, and chose a light dress with thin straps. She fastened her earrings, slipped on low sandals, and grabbed her bag. When her phone buzzed with Caleb's location, she simply replied, "On my way." His apartment was in a quiet neighborhood, full of wide streets and low-rise buildings. Madeline arrived a few minutes early, took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell, and the second he opened the door, that was all it took. His shirt was slightly unbuttoned at the collar, hair still damp from the shower, and that same unguarded smile was there, like someone who already knows what he wants. He welcomed her in with a simple gesture. The kitchen smelled of fresh herbs, the wine was already open, and the table had been set with quiet care. Caleb stepped closer to take her bag, and when he did, his hand brushed lightly against her waist. Just that touch, and all the awareness that came with it. Over dinner, they talked like the moment had been waiting for them. Stories from childhood, favorite movies, jobs that had nothing to do with who they were. They laughed about old memories, traded opinions freely, and drank wine slowly. The food was good, but it wasn't the focus. Madeline looked at him and felt something new, a mix of want and warmth. Caleb listened closely, spoke softly, and let the silence work its way between gestures. After he placed the dishes in the sink, he walked back into the living room and found her already on the couch. He sat beside her, close enough for their legs to touch. "Want dessert?" he asked, eyes fixed on hers. "I do," she replied, not looking away. And he understood. The kiss came faster than the first time, as if neither of them saw a need to wait anymore. Madeline leaned in, and their mouths met with urgency. Caleb pulled her closer with one arm, and her body gave in with natural ease. His hands explored her shape with steady care as the kiss deepened the intimacy that had already been growing. Madeline wrapped her arms around his neck, her body shifting into his lap without hesitation. Their breathing grew heavier, their touch more focused. Neither of them held back, neither of them wanted to stop. When his hands slid along her thighs and up the sides of her back, she felt the heat spread. Caleb pressed his face to the curve of her neck and murmured something too soft to hear, but the tone was enough. She whispered his name, granting permission, and he got it. They made their way to the bedroom already attuned. Clothes were removed slowly, naturally. Madeline felt his skin against hers, and the reaction was immediate. Caleb laid her down with care, not lessening the desire, just guiding its pace. His eyes roamed her body with reverence and longing. His touch was firm but unhurried. When he entered her, the rhythm fit perfectly. Madeline let out a quiet sound against his shoulder and gripped the sheets. Their bodies moved in sync, pausing for eye contact, deep kisses woven into every breath. Caleb knew how to touch, and she wanted all of it. When they reached their peak together, they didn't speak. They just stayed there, sweaty, breathless, entangled. Later, she curled into his chest and stayed silent for a long while. Caleb stroked her hair gently, without expectations, without trying to define what came next. But Madeline knew. It already was. There was no need for a label. There was something real, a desire to stay, to wake up next to him again, to see his sleeping face. When he asked if she wanted to spend the night, she simply nodded and closed her eyes, her breath still shaky, but every part of her at peace. Soft light filtered through the cracks in the curtains as Madeline opened her eyes. It wasn't time to get up yet, and the room was wrapped in that dense kind of quiet that only settles in when the body is truly at peace. Caleb was sleeping beside her, breathing evenly, his face turned toward hers. His arm was still wrapped around her waist, like they hadn't moved since the night before. The sheets were tangled, the blanket askew, their skin still warm. Clear signs of a night that had been intense, and not just because of desire. A deeper intimacy was beginning to take root, even without any definitions. Madeline closed her eyes again and stayed there unhurried, her head resting on his chest, her fingers slowly tracing the side of his abdomen like she was memorizing new territory. When Caleb woke up, he said little, offered a slow kiss, and the morning carried on at their own rhythm. The connection had been renewed without any grand gesture or announcement. After they showered, he stepped out to make coffee. Madeline slipped on one of his shirts and walked through the apartment like she already belonged there. She took the mug directly from his hand, curled up on the couch with her legs crossed, calm in her gaze. They spoke of the previous night only through glances and touches. Caleb looked at her with his usual steadiness, but now something had shifted. There was less doubt, more clarity, as if whatever wall had stood between them had quietly dissolved, and what remained was a simple willingness to stay. He suggested she stay for lunch, and she nodded with a small smile. They shared the kitchen effortlessly, throwing together a simple meal while swapping stories from their teenage years. They laughed at old memories, teased each other, and leaned into one another whenever they passed. It was new, but it already felt like routine. Later, while he washed the dishes and she dried them beside him, Madeline's phone buzzed on the counter. Ruby. So? The message was short, straight to the point, like she already knew the answer. Madeline took her time responding, wanting to get the words right. She typed, "I think something's starting here, and it's light, but strong." Ruby replied with a simple emoji, no jokes. Then she added, "He doesn't dive in easily, but if he's in, he's all in." Madeline read the texts again, slowly. She knew Ruby spoke from experience, and that made it all feel even more grounded. Between the three of them, there was a kind of trust that didn't need to be translated. She put the phone down and returned to Caleb's side like time had simply paused. She sat with him on the couch, rested her head on his shoulder, and said nothing. The way he wrapped his arm around her made it clear he wanted the same thing, By late afternoon, she decided it was time to go home. There wasn't a single awkward moment, no talk about what came next. Caleb walked her to the car, opened the door, and before she got in, kissed her. A steady, simple kiss with the weight of someone who no longer needed to hold back. She pressed her forehead to his before whispering, "See you soon." He replied, "Text me when you're home." The city felt quieter by the time she made it back to her apartment. She washed her face, tied up her hair, and sat on the bed with her legs folded, her bag still on her lap. She reached for her phone to message Ruby, but found a new one already there. "I want to relive today." She typed back, "Me too." And before setting the phone down on the nightstand, she stared at the blank screen for a few seconds, smiling. Nothing else was needed. The weeks that followed turned what had once been uncertainty into something steady. Madeline and Caleb began seeing each other regularly, not out of obligation, but simply because they wanted to. There was no need to explain their plans or schedule each visit. He'd show up with dinner, she'd arrive with wine or coffee for the next morning. They slept side by side without disturbing the comfort of the bed, woke up together, and continued their routines without losing their individual pace. Slowly, time started shaping itself around them with ease. Madeline knew when he had long meetings. Caleb remembered which nights she came home most tired. When they couldn't see each other, they texted naturally. And when they were together, there was no effort, only presence and desire. Little things took on deeper meaning. Early morning coffee, movies watched past midnight, spontaneous touches during casual conversations. Ruby noticed the change. Their conversations now carried a kind of peace that hadn't been there before. They met for coffee downtown on a Thursday afternoon, and Ruby, with a quiet smile, mentioned how her brother seemed lighter. "Funny, he doesn't talk much, but I know his silences, and lately they've been good ones." Madeline laughed and responded sincerely. She said being around him felt good, that she didn't need to hide anything. And with Caleb, everything felt possible. Ruby didn't ask anything else. She didn't need to. She knew there was something real between them. And Madeline, even without sharing the details, made that clear in every word. At work, Madeline stayed just as focused, but she now shared more of her life. Caleb would show up unexpectedly to pick her up or leave a note at her door with a message only she would understand. They went out to dinner with his friends, visited her parents on Sundays, and slowly their lives started to blend effortlessly. Their routines weren't separate anymore. If something good happened at work, she wanted to tell him first. If her day was hard, he was the one she texted. There was no script. Just the natural rhythm of a relationship that grew without friction. At home, they split chores, planned their weeks, and even debated which series to keep watching. And even when they disagreed, there was humor, never distance. It was a love built slowly, but rooted deeper with every step. One weekend, they decided to leave the city. They rented a small house near the mountains, surrounded by trees and an open view of the sky. Madeline brought books. Caleb handled the playlist and the groceries. They spent Saturday cooking together, hiking gentle trails, and at night sat side by side on a wooden deck that looked out over the valley. The breeze was cool, and she wore one of his jackets over her shoulders. Caleb watched her silently, their fingers intertwined, before he spoke in a steady, low voice. "I was already in love with you before any of this started. And still, I can't quite believe you're here with me. What we have, it's more than I ever thought I'd be able to explain. Everything makes sense now. I want to be with you every day, wake up next to you, make plans, build a life together, all of it. Will you marry me?" He pulled a small silver ring from the pocket of his jacket with a subtle shine at its center and held it out with the quiet confidence of someone who never doubted the answer. And his gaze, steady and unwavering, carried the weight of every word. Madeline felt her chest tighten, her whole body respond. Then she nodded slowly, tears in her eyes and a soft smile on her lips. Yes, Caleb kissed her with conviction, drawing her closer, as if sealing her answer with all the emotion he'd been holding back. They stayed on the deck a little longer, wrapped in each other, without needing to say another word. And when they finally went back inside, Madeline looked at the ring for a long moment before slipping it onto her finger. There were no over-the-top promises, no plans carved in stone. But there was certainty. And that was all she needed to begin this next chapter with him. The months following the engagement brought more than just wedding plans. They brought certainty. Caleb and Madeline kept living just as they had before, but with the clear awareness that they were building something lasting. He often slept at her place, already had a toothbrush in the bathroom drawer, a change of clothes in her closet, and his usual spot on the left side of the bed. But they hadn't officially moved in together. Not yet. They'd agreed early on to keep things as they were until the wedding. The announcement came during a simple family dinner, full of hugs, teary smiles, and quiet joy. Madeline's mom cried when she saw the ring. Ruby raised a spontaneous toast, saying she'd never seen her brother so grounded. And Caleb's parents, reserved as always, simply said they were grateful to be part of the moment. Choosing the date came easily. They wanted a ceremony bathed in natural light outdoors, but with structure and charm. They settled on an event venue surrounded by gardens, tall trees, soft lighting, and a spacious hall with big windows that opened onto a wide terrace. Madeline took care of almost everything with Ruby. They picked the flowers together, approved the menu, sampled the desserts. Caleb handled the more practical details, but left the aesthetics to them. Madeline chose her dress without drama, helped by her sister. It was simple, elegant, with lace at the shoulders and a soft train. Nothing flashy, just right, like everything that had unfolded since that trip when their story quietly began. On the morning of the wedding, Madeline woke up early. She stood by the window for a long moment before getting ready. She wasn't anxious, just calm. Her hands were steady, her gaze peaceful. When the dress was zipped up and her earrings were fastened, she looked in the mirror and felt no need to adjust anything. She was already complete. Ruby arrived with a note from Caleb, folded twice without an envelope. It said only, "You are my certainty." Madeline didn't reply in words. She just smiled, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath before stepping forward. The ceremony began in the late afternoon sunlight, streaming through the garden. The guests stood as she appeared between the trees. Caleb waited at the altar, wearing a light grey suit and a smile Madeline had never seen on him before. They locked eyes and didn't look away. There was no need to hide how they felt. Their vows were short, honest, and written by them, crafted with the same care that shaped their relationship. The kiss came right after the "I do," steady and full. The reception carried on across the terrace, glowing with candlelight, and strings of lights hung between the columns. There was live music, good food, carefully selected wine. They danced together as if they were the only two in the world. Then, with their friends, their families, with everyone who had walked beside them. At one point, Caleb stepped back a little, watching Madeline laugh as she danced with Ruby, and stood still, smiling. She noticed his gaze and walked over to him barefoot, her dress loose at the sides, hair slightly undone. "You look like you're ready to leave," she teased. He shook his head. "I look like I still can't believe it's you." That night, they finally went home together. But this time, there were no goodbyes the next morning, no questions about where they would sleep. It was their home now, their life, and everything they'd built so far was only the beginning. The end. So what did you think of this story? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. See you next time.